When we talk about military doctrine, it's often, the big battles, the famous generals.
Right, the set piece stuff.
Exactly. But today, we're diving deep into a strategy that wasn't really born in a lecture hall or on some clear battlefield. It was forged.
Forged is the right word. Forged in intense, protracted national suffering.
We're starting with the century of humiliation. I mean, that phrase alone tells you something. A wound that profoundly shaped Chinese strategic thinking.
Absolutely. And it led, eventually, to one of the most, successful revolutionary doctrines of the modern era. You can't understand modern Chinese military thought without grappling with the foundational trauma of that period.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to distill those core characteristics of China's revolutionary warfare. We're tracing it from, the 17th century right through to 1949?
Yes, up to the communist victory. And crucially, we want to look at how classical strategic thought, stuff going back millennia, actually informed that modern doctrine. It's a fascinating link.
And we've got a great stack of sources to guide us. We're leaning on Joseph G. Babb's work on China's military history, which is pretty comprehensive.
Foundational stuff.
And of course, Mao Zedong himself, his selected works, and on guerrilla warfare, the Samuel B. Griffith translation.
Can't talk about this without Mao's own words.
Definitely not. Then there's S.C.M. Payne's analysis, Mao Zedong, and the strategies of nested war. That sounds intriguing.
Oh, it's sharp, really sharp.
Plus, John Shai and Thomas Collier on defining revolutionary war itself.
Which is important, because the term gets thrown around a lot.
And finally, Toshiyoshi Hara's chapter connecting it all back to the classics. Sun Tzu and the search for a timeless logic of strategy.
It's a powerful lineup. We're essentially tracing this continuous thread of strategic thinking over 2,000 years, from ancient Sun Tzu right up to Mao's revolution.
Classical positioning to modern political mobilization. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with the sheer scale of Chinese history. It's just immense. And Babb really emphasizes this, doesn't he? China as the Middle Kingdom.
Right, it wasn't a nation state the way we think about it from a European perspective. It was an empire, a civilization, really, for a very, very long time.
How long are we talking?
Well, the unitary state, the idea of a unified Chinese empire, goes back to the Qin dynasty in 221, before the Common Era. That's over 2,000 years of continuous imperial history, more or less.
Wow, 2 millennia.
And what's really key for our discussion is who was ruling. The last dynasty, the Qing, were actually foreign-led. They were Manchu.
Right, not Han Chinese.
Exactly. And they came to power in 1644. Now think about that date, 1644. That's 4 years before the Treaty of Westphalia in Europe.
So while Europe is sort of formalizing the nation-state system,
China's being ruled by a foreign dynasty, operating under a much older imperial model. That difference in timing and structure is crucial.
And the Qing weren't even the first foreign dynasty, were they?
No, not at all. You had the Yuan dynasty before them, established by the Mongols, running from about 1279 to 1368. So the idea of foreign rule and the potential for dynastic collapse under foreign leadership, that was part of the historical playbook, you could say.
But this century of humiliation from 1839 to 1949, that was different somehow, more acute.
Much more acute. It fundamentally damaged China's view of itself and its place in the world. It wasn't just dynastic change. It felt like civilizational collapse forced from the outside.
And it's a period that leaders from Mao right up to Xi Jinping today keep referencing. So what kicks it off in 1839?
That's the First Opium War. It marks the beginning of a series of military defeats against Western powers and later Japan. These defeats led to what China calls the unequal treaties.
Treaties that forced concessions, territory, trading rights.
Exactly. But it wasn't just external pressure. The Qing dynasty was also dealing with massive internal problems. These things fed off each other.
We often focus on the Western powers, but the internal stuff was huge too, wasn't it? Like the Taiping Rebellion.
Absolutely devastating. I mean, the Taiping Rebellion, mid-19th century, the estimated death toll is just staggering. Tens of millions. It was a massive civil war.
Tens of millions.
Yes. And the Qing forces, well, they eventually won, but they needed significant foreign help to do it. Think about that, needing foreign armies to put down an internal rebellion. That's a huge loss of face, a huge loss of sovereignty. Utterly humiliating.
And while they're fighting this massive internal fire, The external powers just keep pushing.
They don't let up. In fact, it accelerates. British and French forces march in, capture Beijing, loot the Summer Palace, force more treaties, more concessions in 1858, 1860. We're talking about the physical occupation of the capital.
And the sources mention the United States was involved in this period too, not just Britain and France.
Yes, absolutely. You have the start of the United States Navy's Yangtze River Patrol in 1854, ostensibly to protect American interests, right? Businessmen, missionaries.
But effectively patrolling China's main economic artery.
Undermining sovereignty, no question. And then later, during the Boxer Rebellion around 1900, 1901, the U.S. sent troops, Brigadier General Adna Chaffee's forces, as part of the Eight-Nation Alliance.
An alliance of foreign powers putting down an uprising in China.
And the aftermath, the Boxer Protocols, were incredibly harsh. Huge payments, but also the right for foreign powers to station troops permanently in Beijing and along the route to the sea. Imagine that happening today in Washington or London.
Unthinkable. It's the ultimate sign of weakness, isn't it? You can't even control your own capital.
It proved the king state was basically impotent against foreign military power.
So if the Boxer Rebellion showed the king were powerless, what was the final nail in the coffin for the dynasty?
You could argue it was the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905.
Yeah.
Think about this. A major war fought entirely on Chinese soil Manchuria between two foreign powers, Russia and Japan.
Powers that had just fought alongside each other against the Boxers.
The irony is thick, isn't it?
Right.
But strategically, it showed two things. One, the Qing government was totally irrelevant. Its territory was just a battlefield for others. Two, the rise of Japan as the dominant power in Northeast Asia, displacing Russia and the Europeans.
And this chaos, this power vacuum, leads directly to the Qing collapse.
Right. The dynasty finally falls in the Revolution of 1911.
And 1912 brings the Republic of China, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen. But stability? Not so much.
Not at all. What follows is the warlord era, fragmentation, and eventually the beginnings of the conflict that will define the next few decades. The rise of the Communist Party of China.
Founded when and where?
1921 in Shanghai. Initially, they had Soviet advisors, Comintern influence. They even partnered with the nationalists, the Kuomintang, in what was called the First United Front.
An alliance of convenience, it sounds like.
Very much so. And it didn't last.
It shattered in 1927, right? That's the start of the Chinese Civil War, Part 1.
That's it. Chiang Kai-shek, leading the Kuomintang, turns on the communists. Brutal purges, particularly in the cities like Shanghai.
Forcing the communists out of the urban centers.
Exactly. They were never really equipped for urban revolt anyway, not in the classic Marxist sense. They had to retreat, go into the countryside, the remote areas.
Which leads us to the Long March. Militarily, a disaster on paper.
Oh, absolutely. A forced retrograde. 90% casualties, maybe. Chiang Kai-shek's encirclement campaigns were effective in forcing them out. They marched thousands of kilometers, fighting the whole way.
But strategically, it becomes something else entirely. It's where Mao Zedong really cements his power.
That's the crucial transformation. During this brutal retreat, 1934-1935, Mao rises to undisputed leadership within the Communist Party. He argues against the strategies pushed by the Soviet advisors.
The ones who advocated for more conventional positional warfare.
Yes, the kind of warfare that had gotten them nearly wiped out. Mao argued for a different approach. And the Long March, in a way, proved him right. They survived, reached a new sanctuary area around Yan'an.
And in Yan'an, they rebuild, but crucially, they rethink.
They rethink everything. Mao leads the effort. They discard the foreign dogma, analyze their own specific situation, the 4 characteristics we'll get to, and start developing their own indigenous strategy. The Long March wasn't just a military event. It was the birthplace of Mao's theory of protracted revolutionary war.
Okay, so this history, constant threat, internal collapse, foreign domination, this is the context for Mao's strategic thinking. And S.C.M. Payne calls it the strategies of nested war. This seems key.
It's absolutely central to understanding how the communists, despite being incredibly weak initially, managed to survive and eventually win.
So what are these nested layers? How did Mao see the conflict?
He saw 3 distinct but interconnected wars happening at the same time. Layer 1, the internal civil war, communists versus nationalists. That's been going on since 1927.
Okay, layer 1, civil war.
Layer 2, the regional war. This is the Sino-Japanese War. Japan has been encroaching since 1931 in Manchuria, but it blows up into full-scale war in 1937.
Layer 2, regional war with Japan.
In Layer 3, the global war, World War II. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, China's fight against Japan becomes part of the larger Allied struggle against the Axis powers.
Civil, regional, global, all overlapping.
All overlapping. And Mao's genius, or perhaps ruthlessness, was in understanding how to manipulate the interactions between these layers to benefit the communist cause in the Civil War,
Even if his forces were the weakest militarily in the regional or global context.
especially because they were the weakest. He couldn't afford to fight everyone head-on. So what did he do? He essentially used the Japanese invasion, the regional war, to weaken his main domestic enemy, the nationalists.
How did that work in practice?
His strategy was to focus the Red Army primarily on building political base areas, these Soviets in the rural hinterlands, often behind Japanese lines, places the nationalist government couldn't control and the Japanese couldn't easily occupy permanently.
So, avoid major confrontation with the Japanese.
Avoid it where possible, yes. Conduct guerrilla warfare, certainly. Tie down some Japanese troops, build legitimacy by claiming to fight the invader, but let the main weight of the Japanese army fall on the nationalists.
Let Chiang Kai-shek's armies take the big hits.
Precisely. Mao calculated, quite correctly as it turned out, that the global war meant the United States would eventually defeat Japan. He didn't need to defeat Japan himself. He needed to survive, grow his political base, and conserve his military strength.
While the nationalists bled themselves white fighting the Japanese conventional war.
That's the core of the nested war strategy. Allow the Japanese, as Payne puts it, to annihilate nationalist armies. Then, once Japan was defeated by the Americans in 1945, the communists could emerge from their base areas much stronger politically and relatively stronger militarily compared to the exhausted nationalists, and resume the Civil War under highly favorable conditions.
That sounds incredibly risky, though. What stopped the Japanese from just turning on Mao's base areas and wiping them out? They were the weaker force.
Several things. First, the nature of protracted war doctrine itself. Mobile defense, refusing to offer big conventional targets. Second, the terrain in places like Yan'an was very difficult. Third, the Japanese priority was still the main nationalist forces and controlling the major cities and communication lines. The communist areas were a secondary problem for them strategically.
And the nationalists, they didn't see this happening. They didn't grasp the nested structure.
According to Payne's analysis, no. They tended to think sequentially. First, we unify the country by defeating the warlords. Then we eliminate the communists. Then we deal with Japan.
But the Japanese invasion forced their hand before they could finish off the communists.
Exactly. They got caught fighting a two-front war. A conventional war against a powerful external invader, Japan, and a counterinsurgency against a growing internal revolutionary movement, the communists. Mao, meanwhile, cleverly maneuvered so that the Japanese were effectively fighting the nationalists for him while he focused on the long game. Political mobilization.
Which brings us to that revolutionary foundation, land and loyalty. This required adapting Marxism, didn't it? Away from the cities.
Absolutely. China wasn't industrialized Europe. The proletariat was tiny. The overwhelming majority of the population were peasants. Mao grasped this fundamental reality. He famously said, "The peasant problem is the central problem of the national revolution."
So the strategy had to be built around them. How did these base areas, these Soviets, actually function to win peasant loyalty?
Mao laid out 4 requirements for a viable base area. You needed first a strong party organization to lead and govern. Second, you needed organized workers and, crucially, peasants. Third, strong military units, both the regular Red Army and local militias, Red Guards. And fourth, strategic terrain mountains, remote areas that offered sanctuary.
So party, people, army, and terrain.
Those 4 elements. And within these base areas, the absolute engine of political mobilization was land reform.
Taking land from landlords and giving it to the peasants.
Yes, but it wasn't just an economic policy. It was revolutionary warfare. Mao identified the landlords as the backbone, he called them, of the old feudal or semi-feudal system. To win, the communists had to break that backbone.
And this involved, well, the sources say Mao was pretty explicit about needing coercion.
He was. In his analysis of the peasant movement in Hunan province early on, he talked about the necessity of, and I quote, a brief reign of terror in the villages.
Terror. That's strong language.
It is. But his point was that the old gentry rule was based on centuries of tradition and force. You couldn't just politely ask them to give up power. You had to shatter their authority, violently if necessary, to empower the peasants and show that a new order had arrived.
And once the peasants participated in seizing land?
They were tied to the revolution. If the nationalists came back, they'd lose the land and likely face reprisals. Land reform created irreversible facts on the ground and bound the peasantry's fate to the Communist Party's survival.
Beyond the peasants, who else did Mao target for mobilization? The sources mention women, minorities.
He was remarkably astute about building a broad coalition. He deliberately appealed to women, promising equality, a radical idea in traditional China, effectively mobilizing half the population.
A huge untapped resource.
Huge. He appealed to ethnic minorities, offering self-determination, which contrasted sharply with the Han-centric nationalist government. He targeted youth, intellectuals.
And even enemy soldiers, that seems counterintuitive.
It was incredibly sophisticated. Mao stressed the importance of political work within the enemy's army, trying to win over prisoners, yes, but also infiltrating nationalist units with communist agents.
Spreading propaganda, sowing dissent.
Exactly. Trying to disintegrate the enemy army from within before the battle even started. It was about shifting allegiances, undermining morale. This political work, combined with land reform, was designed to make the military balance shift inexorably in the communists' favor over the long haul.
So Mao has this understanding of the nested war. He's got the political mobilization strategy. Now he needs to formalize it into military doctrine. This is where protracted war comes in, right?
Exactly. It's his synthesis of China's unique, revolutionary reality into a coherent military framework. And in his selected works, Volume 1, he lays out 4 principal characteristics that, for him, define China's specific struggle. These aren't universal necessarily, but specific to China at that time.
Okay, what are these 4 characteristics? Because they seem to dictate why the war had to be long.
They do. Number 1, China is a vast, semi-colonial, semi-feudal country. It's huge, unevenly developed, and it had already gone through a major revolution in 1911, which left things fragmented.
That vastness gives strategic depth, room to retreat and maneuver.
Precisely. Characteristic number 2, the enemy is big and powerful. Initially the Kuomintang, backed by various powers, and later Imperial Japan, a formidable adversary.
Okay, big country, big enemy.
Characteristic number 3, the Red Army is small and weak. Mao is very honest about this. It was born out of defeat in 1927, constantly struggling for resources and manpower.
Small army.
And characteristic number 4, Communist Party leadership in the Agrarian Revolution. This is the unique strength, the political unity, the peasant support base, the mobilizing ideology.
So vast country, powerful enemy, weak army, but strong political leadership and base.
That's the equation. And Mao draws a crucial insight from this. Characteristics 1 and 4, the vast space and the political mobilization, make victory possible. But characteristics 2 and 3, the powerful enemy and the weak army, make the war necessarily protracted.
Ah, I see. You can't win quickly when you're that outmatched militarily. Trying to would be suicide.
Exactly what the earlier Soviet advisors failed to grasp. So the strategy must be one of trading space for time, building strength gradually, and wearing the enemy down over a long period. This leads directly to his famous 3 stages of protracted war,
Which he details in Volume 2 of the selected works. Let's walk through them. Stage 1.
Stage 1 is the strategic defensive. This is when the enemy is on the offensive, advancing, taking territory. The Red Army's job here is primarily survival.
Not trying to hold ground at all costs.
No. It's about preserving forces, avoiding decisive, annihilating battles. You conduct tactical offensives, yes, ambushes, raids, but within an overall strategic withdrawal. Lure the enemy in deep, stretch their supply lines, trade space for time. The goal is simply to prevent your own defeat.
Okay, survive the initial onslaught. Then what? Stage 2.
Stage 2 is the strategic stalemate or consolidation. This is often the longest and most difficult phase. The enemy's initial offensive momentum has stalled. They're trying to consolidate their gains, but they can't advance much further.
And the Red Army?
The Red Army is preparing for the counteroffensive. Guerrilla warfare becomes the primary form of fighting in this stage, constantly harassing the enemy, disrupting their control, supplemented by mobile warfare when conditions are right. This is the really painful period, building up the base areas, enduring economic hardship, dealing with collaborators and traitors. It requires immense patience.
The political work becomes paramount here, right? Consolidating control, mobilizing more people.
Absolutely. This is where the political gains start to shift the overall balance. Even if the military situation looks like a stalemate on a map, you're building the strength for the final push.
Which is Stage 3.
Stage 3, the strategic counteroffensive. Now the tables have turned. The Red Army is strong enough to launch its own major offensives. The enemy is forced onto the strategic defensive, retreating.
And the type of warfare changes again?
Yes. Mobile warfare becomes primary again, but now often involving larger formations, aiming for decisive battles to encircle and destroy enemy units. Guerrilla warfare still plays a supporting role, but the goal now is to deliver the final victory.
It's a very clear, phased approach. And within that, Mao had specific operational principles that differed from conventional warfare.
Right. He stressed things like Uphold the overall strategy of protracted war, but seek quick decisions in individual campaigns or battles. Don't get bogged down.
Okay, strategic patience, tactical speed.
Exactly. He favored mobile warfare over digging into fixed positions, keep the enemy guessing, hit them where they're weak, and crucially, fight battles of annihilation, not just battles of attrition or routing the enemy.
Why was annihilation so important? Why not just push them back?
Because in a revolutionary civil war, routing the enemy isn't enough. They'll just regroup and come back. Annihilating an enemy unit surrounding it, destroying it, capturing its soldiers and equipment has multiple benefits. You eliminate their fighting power permanently, you gain weapons and supplies which you desperately need, and you capture prisoners who can potentially be re-educated and join your own forces.
Or at least provide intelligence.
Right. Annihilation is a political act as much as a military one. It directly converts the enemy's strength into your own.
Which underscores, again, the absolute primacy of politics in Mao's thinking. The Red Army wasn't just soldiers.
He was crystal clear on this. He wrote, "The Red Army fights not merely for the sake of fighting, but in order to conduct propaganda among the masses, organize them, arm them, and help them to establish revolutionary political power." Fighting was a means to a political end. Without that political objective, the fighting and the army itself lost its meaning.
That puts immense pressure on the commander, doesn't it? Not just tactics, but understanding the whole political picture, matching subjective direction with objective reality.
It's a huge intellectual demand. You have the objective conditions, your troops, the enemy, the terrain, but the commander has to use, as Mao put it, boldness and sagacity, intelligence, cunning to figure out how to turn weakness into strength, how to find the enemy's vulnerabilities, how to concentrate force at the right time and place. It's about getting the subjective direction of the plan, the idea to match the objective reality effectively.
Which is where he explicitly references Sun Tzu, right? Know the enemy and know yourself.
Yeah. And you can fight 100 battles without danger of defeat. It's that emphasis on knowledge, on understanding the whole situation, that connects Mao back to the classical tradition.
And John Shai and Thomas Collier, their definition of revolutionary war helps frame this whole thing. It's not just guerrilla tactics.
It's a really important clarification they make. Revolutionary war is the whole package. The armed struggle, plus the political mobilization, plus the social program, all aimed at seizing state power. Guerrilla tactics are just one tool in the toolbox. You also have agitation, propaganda, organization, sometimes even periods of conventional fighting.
And Mao's success in pulling this off in China, it had a massive impact globally, didn't it?
Enormous, especially after World War II, in the decolonization era. His writings, his model of protracted people's war, became hugely influential in agrarian societies across Asia, Africa, Latin America, who saw parallels in their own struggles against colonial powers or entrenched regimes. Vietnam is probably the most famous example. So now we need to really cement that link back to the classics. Toshi Yoshihara's work argues convincingly that Mao, while revolutionary, was operating within a very long, very deep Chinese strategic tradition, epitomized by Sun Tzu's Art of War.
The Art of War. It's probably the most famous military book ever written, isn't it? Still read today in business schools, military academies everywhere.
It is. Its endurance is remarkable. Yoshihara points out it's the oldest and most widely read military treatise, and its core appeal, I think, lies in its emphasis on intellect, on knowledge. War, for Sun Tzu, is too important than a matter of life and death, the road to survival or ruin, to be left to chance or brute force.
It's all about knowing the situation, knowing yourself, knowing the enemy.
Deeply knowing them. And from that knowledge comes the central, most quoted assertion: all warfare is based on deception.
Deception is the key to victory.
Yes. But it's not just about trickery. It leads to a specific hierarchy of strategic action. Sun Tzu says the best thing is to attack the enemy strategy itself. Foil their plans before they even start.
Okay, strategy first.
Second best, disrupt their alliances, isolate them. Only third best is to attack their army in the field. And the worst option, the last resort, is to attack walled cities.
So it's heavily weighted towards preparation, positioning, and psychological factors, rather than just head-on clashes.
Exactly. Which brings us to this crucial but sometimes tricky concept of Shi.
Shi. It gets translated as strategic power, momentum, positional advantage. What's the best way for us, and for you listening, to grasp it?
All those things, but maybe think of it as potential energy, or the strategic disposition of forces that creates an inevitable momentum towards victory. It's about shaping the situation before the clash, using knowledge and deception, so that when force is applied, it's devastatingly effective, almost effortless, like water flowing downhill, or a tightly drawn crossbow releasing its bolt. The setup generates the power.
The setup is the she.
The setup creates the she, and Chinese military history is full of these almost legendary examples used to illustrate it. Our sources highlight a couple of classics.
Right, like the Battle of Maling, way back in 341 before the Common Era. This one sounds like pure psychological manipulation to create she.
It really is. You have Sun Bin, supposedly a descendant of Sun Tzu, advising the state of Qi. His rival, Pang Wan, leading the Wei army, was known to be arrogant and contemptuous of Qi soldiers.
So Sun Bin decides to play on that arrogance.
Exactly. Qi forces are retreating, pursued by Pang Wan. Sun Bin orders his army to light 100,000 cooking fires the first night.
Okay, looks like a big army.
Then the second night, only 50,000 fires. And the third night, only 30,000.
Ah, sending a signal. It looks like massive desertions, like the Qi army is falling apart.
Precisely the signal Pang Wan reads. Thinking the Qi are cowards and melting away, he gets overconfident. He abandons his slower-moving infantry and supplies and races ahead with just his elite cavalry trying to catch the remnants.
Straight into Sun Bin's trap.
Straight into it. Sun Bin had led him into a narrow defile at Maling. He hid 10,000 crossbowmen in ambush. He scraped the bark off a tree and wrote, "Pang Wan will die beneath this tree." When Pang Wan arrived at night, saw the writing and lit a torch to read it.
That was the signal for the ambush.
10,000 crossbow bolts rained down. Pang Wan and his elite force were annihilated. Sun Bin didn't win through brute force. He won by manipulating Pang Wan's mind and creating a position of overwhelming advantage to Shidi before the killing even started.
Incredible. And the other example, the Battle of Wei River 204 before the Common Era, this involves manipulating the terrain itself.
Yes, this time it's Han Jin, one of the founders of the Han Dynasty, facing Long Zhu, who was apparently also quite arrogant and had a larger army.
A recurring theme, this arrogance.
Hubris is often the enemy's weak point in these stories. So Han Jin has his men go upriver from the Wei River crossing point and secretly build a temporary dam overnight using thousands of sandbags.
Okay, damming the river.
The next morning, the river is shallow. Han Jin leads part of his army across, attacks Long Zhu's forces, and then deliberately stages a chaotic retreat back across the shallow riverbed.
Making it look like they're defeated and running.
Exactly. Long Zhu, smelling victory, orders his army to charge across the river in pursuit. Just as Long Zhu himself and his vanguard get across, but the bulk of his army is still in the riverbed.
Han Jin breaks the dam upstream.
Unleashes a torrent of water. It crashes down, drowns thousands of Long Zhu's men midstream, and cuts Long Zhu's advance force off from the main body of his army.
Splitting the army in two with a flood.
Han Xin then easily turns and destroys the isolated vanguard, including Long Zhu. Again, it's deception confirming the enemy's bias, maneuvering them into a fatally disadvantageous position, and then applying force. That's creating Xi through manipulating the physical environment.
It's clear how this kind of thinking, deception, positioning, seeking annihilation through advantage connects to Mao. He explicitly cited Sun Tzu.
He did, especially on deception, surprise, the relationship between regular forces, Xiang, and irregular or surprise forces, Qi, that interplay, is very Sun Tzuian.
And we see these principles applied operationally much later, for instance, in the Chinese intervention in the Korean War.
Absolutely. The initial entry of the Chinese People's Volunteers into Korea in late 1950 is a textbook case study, as Yoshiharu points out. First, absolute secrecy. They moved huge numbers of troops across the Yalu River at night, undetected.
Wearing North Korean uniforms sometimes, right, to blend in?
Yes, adding to the confusion. Then, they didn't hit the strongest United Nations units, the American divisions, head-on at first. They targeted the weaker Republic of Korea divisions on the flanks.
Why? To gain easy victories.
Partly that, build morale, capture equipment.
Yeah.
But also strategically, to unravel the flanks of the UN line before hitting the center. Classic indirect approach.
And then came the feigned retreat, the deception part.
Right. After some initial sharp attacks, Peng Dehuai, the Chinese commander, deliberately broke contact, pulled his forces back significantly. They even released some UN prisoners, feeding them stories about supply problems, collapsing morale.
All designed to make General MacArthur think the intervention was limited, maybe even failing.
Exactly. To encourage his home-by-Christmas offensive, to lure the UN forces deeper north, stretching their lines, making them complacent, playing on MacArthur's known confidence, maybe overconfidence.
Setting the trap, creating the Xi.
And when the UN forces advanced into what they thought was empty territory, Peng launched a massive, unexpected counteroffensive with hundreds of thousands of troops. The shock and surprise were devastating.
Leading to the longest retreat in U.S. Army history.
It was a stunning operational success, achieved through classic Sun Tzu'scall principles. Secrecy, deception, attacking weakness, manipulating the enemy's perception, and achieving overwhelming local superiority at the point of attack.
It's fascinating, though, that this Sun Tzu'scall optimism, this belief that you can control the chaos of war through knowledge and positioning, didn't just stay in China. Our sources suggest it influenced Western military thinking, too.
Yes, particularly in the post-Cold War era, after the seemingly clean, decisive victory in the First Gulf War. There was this feeling, especially in the U.S. military, that technology and information could overcome the traditional fog and friction of war.
Which led to doctrines like Joint Vision 2020.
Exactly, published around the year 2000.
Yeah.
You read it, and the language is incredibly optimistic, almost Sun Tzu in its flavor. It talks about achieving full spectrum dominance.
Full spectrum dominance. That
Yeah.
sounds total.
It implies near total control. The goal was decision superiority, knowing more and deciding faster than any adversary. Using advanced C4IS, command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to get inside the enemy's decision cycle.
And combining that information dominance with dominant maneuver.
Right, the ability to move forces with unmatched speed and precision to gain positional advantage, overwhelm the enemy quickly, perhaps even compel them to surrender with minimal fighting. There's a strong echo of Sun Tzu's ideal of winning without fighting, or winning through superior positioning and knowledge. #outro.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've traced this thread from the trauma of the century of humiliation through the collapse of imperial China.
To Mao's adaptation of Marxism for a peasant society, his development of nested war strategy to navigate multiple conflicts,
And the formalization of protracted war doctrine with its distinct stages and emphasis on political mobilization alongside military action.
and underpinning it all, these deep roots in classical Chinese strategic thought, particularly Sun Tzu, with the focus on deception, knowledge, and creating that positional advantage, that she.
Mao fused the political necessities of agrarian revolution with the timeless military principles of protracted struggle and strategic positioning.
And that fusion proved incredibly powerful in the Chinese context.
All right, so here's the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We've seen how Mao successfully used this protracted war model, heavily influenced by Sun Tzu's strategic optimism, this idea that knowledge and positioning can almost guarantee victory. And we know it influenced others, like in Vietnam.
But there's always the counterpoint, isn't there? The Clausewitzian view, which emphasizes war's inherent uncertainty, the role of chance, friction, the unpredictable fog of war.
Exactly. So the question for you is, in today's world, in modern great power competition, where things like information superiority and command and control are constantly contested, where cyber warfare and disinformation muddy the waters, what does this tension between Sun Tzu's optimism and Clausewitz's realism actually imply?
Can you really achieve that kind of perfect knowledge and control that Sun Tzu seems to promise, and that doctrines like Joint Vision 2020 aspired to?
Or does relying too heavily on just the Sun Tzuan perspective, that desire for guaranteed victory through information dominance risk, as one of our sources puts it, wishing away interaction, distorting the fundamental nature of war, which is inherently interactive, uncertain, and messy?
How do you balance the quest for strategic advantage with the acceptance of friction and unpredictability? That's the challenge, a crucial question for anyone thinking about strategy today.